Hey everyone, Pastor George here with today's Bible study recap. Today in Bible study, we looked at the second chapter of Haggai. So, for context, on Sunday, we looked at the first chapter of Haggai, and I talked about how Haggai is broken up into four different visions that Haggai gets. So, the first vision is all of what we would call chapter one. The three other ones are all found in the second chapter, what we call the second chapter of Haggai. So, we looked at those separate visions today, and each of them has something different that God kind of wants to explain to the people. So the first vision, or really the second vision, right, is found in chapter 2, verses 1 through 9. So in this one, God is explaining and continuing to call the people to build the temple, because what's happened is they've begun rebuilding the temple as they're supposed to do, but they realize that this temple is not nearly as nice as the one that they were looking at before, right? Solomon's temple, not as glorious, not as grand, not as cool, whatever, however you want to describe it. It's not what it used to be. And that's pretty upsetting for them, because some of the oldest among them might remember when they were children what the other temple looked like. And so God is saying, it's not about what it looks like. It'll be glorious because my presence will be there. That's what matters, right? God, the purpose of the temple and the tabernacle before it was that God's presence was in a physical spot located among the people to remind them of him. And so he's saying, this is what the important thing is. So don't worry, it's going to be there. And it's going to be glorious because my presence is there, and then all of the nations will one day stream into the temple. You have this vision of the future, which is going to come up again in the fourth vision. So, and then goes to vision three. Vision three is God explaining why he brought this drought. So because the people hadn't built the temple, God brought a drought on the land and was basically stymieing them from getting any sort of success, right? And this is the vision that he uses to explain kind of what that is. So he has Haggai go to the priest and ask a religious question. According to the Torah, am I unclean if I touch a dead body, right? And is the fruit that I have, like the food that I have, is that unclean as well? And the answer is yes, right? And so God is saying, you are like the people who have touched a dead body in the works that you were doing before me, because you weren't ritually clean. You weren't caring about me. You weren't doing the things that my law requires you to do. You were putting your own needs above mine. And so you were ritually unclean. That is why I brought the drought. And then it's not because they were physically ritually unclean, right? They might have been going through whatever religious requirements that they had to, but their hearts before the Lord weren't putting him first. So he says, because of that, that is why I brought the drought. But continue working, right, and continue showing your faithfulness, and I will bless that. And so they continue doing that. The final vision that you get, and this is verses 20 to 23, the four verses at the end, is a vision of the future day of judgment. So the Lord is saying, with all this work that you're doing, it's going to pay off for something. And he uses this image of a signet ring. A signet ring is something a king would use to stamp things to show his authority. And he says Zerubbabel is going to be like my signet ring. What does that mean? Well, Zerubbabel is the governor under the Persian Empire. He's a Jew, and he's a descendant of David. So he's the one who's governing this province for the Persians. And he says to him, right, you're going to be like a signet ring. What that means is that I'm going to establish you, right, as my rule, right, through the line of David, right? You're going to be a permanent remember of my remark about how I'm going to hold David's line, and I'm going to do something in the future, and that's going to culminate in the Messiah. That's not what God says, but that's the buildup, right? It's going to culminate with this thing that's going to be happening in the future. And this is a kind of a contrast of what he says in Jeremiah to the king at that time. And this is in Jeremiah 22:24. He's like, I wish I could take the signet ring away from you. So it's a vision that it's a imagery that God likes to use. So Haggai ends, like a lot of these books we're looking at, with this pointing to the future of looking towards this Messiah that's going to come, right? Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, they're all going to be pointing us in that direction. Of course, other prophets did as well, but because that time is approaching, they are going to be, showing us that that's where all of this is headed. So, yeah, that's what we talked about today. I hope you found that interesting, and I will maybe see you tomorrow for a new thing. I'm not quite sure yet, but I'll definitely see you on Sunday for worship. Peace out.